You want to see a good example of why no one takes Christian arguments very seriously?
Oh, do I ever.
This comment was left on one of my videos today.
I agree, this is a bad argument, and you should stop now before you say something as equally uneducated.
And so I did a little digging.
Yeah, the key word there is little. Very little.
And it led me to this article here. Data shows less religion equals less violence.
So this article from Arizona's Secular Voice did not cite any peer-reviewed studies that ran multivariate analyses or adjusted for confounding factors. They essentially just did a bivariate analysis where you look at two variables. In this case, it was weekly church attendance and firearm mortality rates. But if you were to use this as evidence that religion leads to higher crime rates, this would be fallacious reasoning, because as everyone knows, correlation is not causation. Moreover, peer-reviewed meta-analyses and systematic reviews continuously find that religiosity is associated with less crime and violence. This review said approximately 90% of the studies find an inverse or beneficial relationship between religion and some measures of crime or delinquency. Only 9% of the studies found no association or reported mixed findings, whereas only 2 studies found that religion was positively associated with a harmful outcome. This meta-analysis said that we examined the data from 60 studies and we find that religion had a statistically significant, moderately sized effect on crime of about negative 0.12. Our findings give confidence that religion does indeed have some deterrent effect. Research also shows religiosity corresponds with lower levels of direct and indirect aggression and an increase in self-control and compassion. So the authors at Arizona's Secular Voice did not do a lot of research when they wrote this article.
It was demonstrated that the higher weekly church attendance is, the higher the firearm mortality rate is among communities. That means the more people that go to church, the more often guns are used.
No, that does not, because correlation is not causation. Do you also think that Nicolas Cage films cause people to drown in swimming pools? The research does not support the idea that weekly church attendance leads to more gun violence. In fact, the research supports the opposite conclusion.
Actually, murder rates, like most violent crime rates, are lower in more secular nations and the more secular states in the US, such as Vermont and Oregon, compared to more religious states, like Louisiana and Alabama.
Oregon and Vermont also have less minorities, and since you're only doing a bivariate analysis, we could switch out the variable of religiosity for the variable of minorities. And using your own logic, we'd have to conclude that having more minorities in a region leads to more crime. That would obviously be wrong to conclude, so why do you get to say religiosity leads to higher crime rates from this surface-level understanding of the data? Research actually seems to indicate that people living in poor communities or harsh living conditions tend to become more religious. To quote from 2 researchers, "The greater social protection, longevity, and health found in wealthy post-industrial societies and welfare states means that fewer people in these societies regard traditional spiritual values as vital to their lives or to the lives of their community." So it's more likely people living in poor conditions just tend to become religious. It's not that religiosity leads to these bad conditions.
And another study conducted by the LA Times says,
That's not a study, that's just an article from Phil Zuckerman, who does more bivariate analyses.
and those nations with the highest rates of religiosity tend to be the most problem-ridden in terms of high violent crime rates, high infant mortality rates, high poverty rates, and high rates of corruption.
As I said, this is just another bivariate analysis that doesn't adjust for confounding factors. You can't derive meaningful conclusions from this type of data, because sometimes when we look in these nations, we find an inverse relationship. For example, this study found that secular nations were the most tolerant, but in these nations, the least tolerant people were the non-religious. Also, Roland to Salem ran a robust model and found that Protestantism was positively associated with more voice and accountability in government, political stability, political transformation, and citizen empowerment. Robert Woodbury's model found similar results come from Christian missionary activity. Do I need to keep going? Because I got so much more research I can cite.
Every single week, I get people coming into my comment section asking why I even make this kind of content at all. And quite honestly, just this singular study,
Again, you didn't cite studies. You cited articles with weak data.
and this singular TikTok I just made, that alone is reason enough for me to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and what do you think you're doing?
Exposing irrational, illogical, and dishonest Christian thought.
Oh, the irony.
And I guess murderous actions too.
That's right, folks. From 2 articles he found online, he can conclude that religious people are more likely to commit murderous actions. And they say we Christians believe in fairy tales.